Hey, how's it going? My name is Byron Gonzalez here for the SoCal Sound. Now that we have you here, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel so you can check out some really cool SoCal Sound sessions, whether they're in the past or any of them that are coming up. So today here in studio, I have an amazing singer-songwriter. He is out of Sandy Lake First Nations. He's a First Nations singer-songwriter. We got Aysanabee here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad this worked out.
Yeah, and at the time of this recording, it's pouring out there. So Thank you so much for coming out during the crazy weather that SoCal does not have.
Yeah, well, this is like, it seems very mild to me, but I know for a lot of locals, you're saying like people like plan to stay home. For me, I feel like people would still be out getting groceries and construction would still be happening.
Everything, the full life is in Canada. They just don't.
Yeah, well, it's like there should be snow right now, but it's just rain and it's nice. I mean, I'm staying on the beach right now, so I don't really get to have the beach time. But the waves are still looking pretty sweet.
Would you go out there in the rain? Are you a surfer?
No, I went surfing once on a vacation, and I went to Lisbon in Portugal and did a surf lesson there. But
that's about it.
I have not done so far. I'm actually, it's funny you should say, I was just talking about, if I ever do get a chance to get a vacation in the next couple of years, I do want to, go spend some real time in, Mexico.
Okay.
I've have friends who, goes there and goes to Sayulita and just lives there and just kind of wakes up and surfs, then eats, fresh food, and it just seems like a really good place to kind of get grounded. So.
Wow, that's really cool. It seems like that, plus, a good... You bring your guitar, you get some good songs out of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be a really good place to kind of, just work on new music and find space to do that. It's interesting. I realize you kind of take those sort of things for granted. Now I'm really having to schedule in time and book time to write songs, which is interesting because I mean the inspiration isn't always going to hit you, but you just have to be all right, these are the days that I'm going to write.
Yeah, you have to actually have a work schedule. You are an entrepreneur per se.
Exactly. So I'm still getting used to the business side of music, but I definitely still enjoy wholeheartedly the creative aspect and the kind of soul nourishing part of it.
Yeah. Well, your music is very soul nourishing as well. Your lyrics, the sounds. For those of you that don't listen to my show on the SoCal Sound, probably haven't heard. I play Eagle Death. I played music from his latest album, Watin, and his new EP that just got released called Here and Now. It is amazing. You have amazing storytelling abilities, amazing guitar playing abilities too. How I kind of want to know, from the beginning, when did you find this passion for music? Were you surrounded by music? Your parents played music, or did you go on your own musical journey?
So I was pretty young, and so my brother played a bit of music, but then he moved out when I was pretty young, and I grew up out in kind of rural northern Ontario, and my mom kind of had this idea to kind of have a house that had solar panels and a hobby farm and kind of to be able to kind of just be fully self-sustained, but that all costs a lot of money. So the
equipment, everything.
And so because my mom she never finished post-secondary because she became a mother and so we kind of just work in hotels and laundromats and stuff like that, and so to get solar panels is way out of that budget, right? So we moved out to the country and kind of lived still off grid, but we had no water or electricity, and so I had 3 things growing up, and one was this dune buggy we made out of a lawnmower, but I built a jump for it, and then that was
cool.
Gone, and then
you broke it?
Yeah, I built a jump for it, and because I had this little track in the backyard, and I'd drive in this circle because I was this thing's sweet. And I decided to build a jump for it one day, and I went and I took this jump, and then the whole frame just fell apart, and we didn't have welding tools or anything, so it was just kind of all right, well that thing is gone. And, so the second thing I had was a bow and arrow my grandfather gave me, and he and he would like make the arrows. Like he had all these like this little workshop where he would like grab all these like metal tubes and stuff and like
That's really cool.
make the arrows and so I played with that, and then eventually like I was doing target practice and like an arrow ricocheted and like flattened the tire on my mom's vehicle, and then like she took that away.
What?
And so I had a guitar that my brother had left behind, and yeah, like I just kind of started playing guitar as something to do. Like if I wasn't just running through the bush, I was playing guitar.
And you can't break anything with a guitar.
Exactly.
Unless you go full rock star on it.
And so I played guitar, but then when I started going to high school, that's when I started really getting into guitar, because like I met a friend in high school, and we'd go to his house on lunch break, and he would like start. He's like, you play guitar, you gotta check out this guy. And he had electricity, and he had the internet, and he had YouTube, and he like pulled up this guy, Eric Mongrain, and he like played his guitar like a piano. He did all this tap percussion stuff on it.
Interesting. Okay.
And it became a thing where I just like go to his house on lunch breaks and be like, hey, mind if I, and like I would be like searching all these different guitar players. And crazy enough, actually, one of them was Don Ross, and he's like this Canadian guy, and I didn't know. So there's like this new National Indigenous Music Board that just started in Canada, and so we had like this Zoom meeting where all these different Indig artists and people in the music industry like just got together. They had like 5 of these meetings, and like I hop on the Zoom and like Don Ross is on there. And I was like, oh really, man? I didn't even know you were Indig, and like you like it taught me how to play guitar basically.
That was full circle, huh?
Yeah.
Serendipitous.
So yeah, that's how I got into it. Was just kind of playing in the bush and writing songs and just kind of, trying to understand life through music, I guess. So.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. It's like that from that story you told me. It just sounds like your life could have been so different if those things hadn't broken, or if you hadn't like shot your mom's tire off and gotten those items away from you.
Well, that's the thing. Like I'm still I'm still kind of a believer that like it, I'm not sure if we're truly like actually kind of like meant to be this or that. Like I feel like we just kind of go about the world and like find something and gravitate towards it, and like you just put enough time into it, and then you just kind of like learn to love it. And so yeah, like I don't know, maybe if there was a paintbrush there, I wonder if like I would have got like really into painting, or if there was like something else there. But
yeah, but the guitar, and you sound great on guitar, and you learned it well, and so you have an album out, you have an EP. I want to talk about your album, Joaquin. I love the cover. You were telling me it's a portrait of your grandpa, which reflects great on the content of the entire album, because throughout the album it's mixed with an interlude in a song, and those interludes are conversations that you had with your grandfather. What made you decide to specifically add those sound bites from, I'm sure, many conversations that you had with your grandfather?
Yeah, you know what? There was like so many different stories to kind of like be inspired by, but like I would just kind of listen to the recordings, because how the first one even happened, like I was just like, it was the end of 2020, and like the holidays came about, and you still weren't allowed to like visit family, so I just like turned on the recordings, and we're just kind of like sitting in my little like home studio and like listening to my grandfather speak, and then like he just talked about his dad, C.C. Bano, and I think we just talked about who he was and what he did, and then I was just kind of like, oh, well, like what does C.C. Bano mean? Because like that's an Ojibwe Curie word, right? And he didn't know what it meant, and it wasn't because like he lost like a memory, like he didn't know what his dad's name meant, because he was like taken from his family when he was a child, and like didn't get to know his family, and that just kind of had just like this impact on me of just like something simple. It's like a child not knowing his father's name, and so yeah, I ended up just writing a song, and then I wrote 2 songs, and then I thought like this would be something that I would do over the course of however long it took me to like kind of write a record, because the whole reason I was inspired to kind of like even do these recordings was like my grandfather had just moved him into like long-term care, and like he was starting to lose his memories, and so like me, like I moved off the res when I was like 4, and then kind of moved to all these small northern towns.
Okay.
And so, you know, reconnecting for me, like, kind of started when I kind of moved to Toronto, because like growing up in all these northern towns in Canada, there's like kind of there's like kind of a lack of understanding. Like they like people don't know about residential schools as much as they do now, and people don't know about like how they impacted families and how they, you know, destroyed families. And so yeah, like we never talked about that, right? And so like,
so it's your way of preserving your own history too, especially getting these last memories from your grandfather.
Exactly, because like when he started forgetting his memories, like it was like at the time I'm like, this is like my last like direct like connection to all this family history and all this culture that you know we had to kind of dig back, because like even he was taken from it, right? And so like I just spent that year just kind of recording and yeah, just recording these conversations, because like, yeah, we talked for maybe a couple months before the recording started, because like you only have small talk for so long, and then you start talking about real stuff. So yeah, like it was like just a year of these conversations. And so how I ended up picking the specific interludes, like I just kind of listened until something just made me feel a certain way, and then I started writing.
So were all of these songs directly based off what your grandpa was saying and retelling?
Yeah, exactly. Except like with one song, "Bringing the Fire," that one, like I had a kind of a draft of that before, but it was like before when I flew up before the pandemic, and I remember my grandfather had become a deacon, and I remember like he asked me to come take photos, and there was this kind of like this weird feeling I had, like we were kind of losing something, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because like the residential schools were like kind of, they're run by the Catholic Church, and so like I kind of have for a while kind of had like this kind of weird feeling when it kind of came to the Catholic Church and certain religions. But then, you know, now I've grown to a point where it's just like, you know, it's not like the religion isn't to blame. It's like the people who say they work in the name of those religions, and sometimes they do like really kind of obscene things, right? And so yeah, like I was really inspired when he was talking about kind of bringing these kids in the middle of the night to like waking the kids up in residential school and getting everyone to speak in their language so they didn't forget their language. Because like, you know, they're all taking all these kids who kind of don't know each other, and then if they get caught speaking their language, you know, they're like beaten and they're like punished for doing anything that connects them back to their culture. And so my grandfather, like 8 years old, would like wake the kids up when like all the nuns and priests had gone to sleep, and like be like, yeah, they would just have conversations. And so that's kind of what inspired that song and brought that back. Because like I didn't know, like my brother was like, yeah, like grandpa still like practiced his culture just kind of like in secret, even from us. So
yeah, because it's so ingrained of just that fear, I guess, and
and it was
not knowing like the sort of cultural change that's happening now, where it's kind of okay. Some places, right? Some places, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean you're conditioned long enough. Like even like I remember even visiting my grandparents like as a kid in like the Paw, Manitoba, and like we'd run around the house, but even going into their bedroom and just even the beds, like just 2 single beds side by side, I was like, that's like
interesting.
But like that's how they did it in residential school. Like so it was interesting, especially like because I was working on these songs, and that's when I kind of met Ishkade Records, which is like this indigenous record label in Canada, and like I remember like I saw like an ad to play like the International Indigenous Music Summit, and I put in like a submission and ended up playing it. And then I guess they saw my like live video, and they contacted me, and they're just like, who are you? How come we've never heard of you? And I was just like, oh, I'm like, yada yada yada. And there's just like, we saw the video. Like, what are you doing? Are you signed to anybody? I'm like, no, I'm just like working in Toronto, playing music, and trying to set something up, I guess. And like, what are you working on right now? And I told them about this record and this idea I had.
Also, you had that idea already of including your grandfather's.
Yeah, and like, so I thought it would be like probably 4 years till I put it out, right? Because I was working in journalism at the time, and like, you know, they say you hear people being like, oh, I watched the news for like an hour and I'm so exhausted, right?
Yeah, because so much bad stuff happening. Yeah.
So when you work in the news for like 8 hours, like you're just 8 times as exhausted, right? So like,
depressed.
yeah. So like, it's like when I'd finished like a whole shift and like try and like work on this record, like it was like pretty slow going. And but then like I told them, and they're like, well, we're starting up a brand new record label, and like these are the exact kinds of stories we're trying to amplify.
That's cool.
And yeah, and it was wild because like reflecting on that now, like no record label signs anyone with like a demo and an idea and like no track record of anything.
Or Spotify numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
Instagram numbers.
Like record labels will like sign you when you've done most of the work. You know?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so like, yeah, they signed me, and then I think like I just started working on it so much harder. And
cool.
And yeah, because suddenly it wasn't just me. Like it was like I was like, oh well, like I want to like honor this relationship that we're building here. And so I started working on this record, and I think like when I started realizing like this record would be heard by a lot more people, like that's when like I started like having a little bit of like, I guess, reluctancy to the specific, like the context of the record. Because my immediate thought was just like our residential school survivors gonna hear these songs and hear these stories and then suddenly be like triggered and like re-traumatized, and like maybe it would like unearth things that they've buried a long time ago, you know?
Interesting.
And so, but like two things. One being like when that thought started coming, and then I started like looking back at the record, like I did like half focus it on like my grandfather meeting my grandmother in residential school and them falling in love. And so there was kind of like all these different stories, even though there was like obviously some dark ones. There were like songs and interludes that kind of like did focus on like his strength and resilience. And I remember like when the record came out, people would start reaching out, and like like 2 residential school survivors had reached out and said like they were just kind of like, hey, like I heard your record, and you know, I'm so happy that like our stories are finally being told by our people and in our words, and like they're like, Miigwech so much, like thank you so much for doing this work, and like I find it so healing. And like that was like the opposite of what I was worried could happen, right?
You were thinking like the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Pleasantly surprised to get the
exactly.
opposite.
And like it was crazy too, because I didn't expect it to kind of have the impact it would. Like I had people like reaching out, like I can't say the name, but like he's like, hey, I'm like a 30-year-old white guy in Southern Ontario, and like I heard your song on the radio, and like I went home and I Googled you, and then I found your record and I listened to it, and he's like, man, I did not know like about all this history, and then I had to like do my own deep dive and do some research, and like he's like, man, I don't know how to feel right now, but I'm so sorry. Like he's just like, thank you for like opening my eyes to like kind of this history and stuff. Because even though the record, like it's my grandfather's story, it's not like an uncommon story. It's like like a lot of families in Canada and the U.S. have very, very similar kind of, you know, history that's not shared, or it's
yeah.
like, history is written by the victors, right? So
Exactly.
that stuff's kind of glossed over.
Well, I think that's exactly like the same idea that your record label took, right? Or that's why they took the risk on you,
Yeah.
per se. So that's amazing that it happened, and that they felt the same way, and which is why they wanted to get your story out there. Even though they're like, I don't know if he has great Spotify numbers, I don't know if he has great Instagram, let's just do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another, like, to your journalism, your inner journalist too, to providing stories. And
well, that's interesting too, because like I moved to Toronto to play music and pursue music, and then I got there and I ended up like my grandmother was always like, make sure you have a plan B. So like I applied to 3 programs. I applied to like nursing and massage therapy and journalism, and I got into all 3, and I just remember like not knowing what to choose. I'm like, oh wait, like this isn't just something this is like 3 years of your life, or 4 years, and then like whatever. And so I ended up choosing journalism. A, because it was like 3 years, and I was like, okay, it's only 3 years. But B, because it was like, I was like, this is like kind of similar to being a songwriter, because you're telling stories, and so yeah. Now that all this stuff has happened, and I kind of like have a music career now. Some people are like, oh man, you should have just done music the whole time. And I was just like, no, like honestly, if I hadn't done all these things and things didn't happen the way that they happened, like I wouldn't have made the record the way I made the record. And like, I would have just put out a record and probably still been working, so like I think, everything has been happening so kind of like organically, and it's been kind of a crazy, like, year and a half or 2 years.
I think you have to have, again, it's the same reason I was seeing another interview that you chose to reclaim your name, like Aysanabee. It's that thing about not forgetting your past and making the past come to the present. So that's always gonna hit hard, and because I'm a person of color, and we get the same experiences, right? Like, our history gets silenced or doesn't get told at all. So as long as you have that in the back of your head, like, I think it's gonna do well. Yeah,
and it's been amazing, like working with a bunch of like people who get it too. Like, it's interesting, like working with Ishkade, like an indigenous label. There were certain things, like especially with the context of like the record, like that I just didn't have to explain. I didn't have to like. They understood. And
I wonder how many labels would allow their artists to have that many interludes after every song, right? They're like, what are you doing? You have to have song, and maybe one skit in there or something like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, it was like really kind of like, really nice to have complete kind of creative control. And so, like there wasn't much pushback. I feel like there was maybe one person who was just kind of like, like I kind of, I listened to the record, and I kind of felt like it was a bit droning, and I was like, well, I was like, the record's done. Like, I can't go back and like.
Just one person. People, I'm sure.
And then flash forward like a year, and like the record's out, and then like it just went kind of crazy.
You got nominated for a Juno Award too.
Yeah, I got like that Canadian Grammy nomination, and
too? Wow.
Oh no, it's a Canadian. We call it the Canadian Grammys, right?
Got it.
For people who are just like, what's a Juno?
Got it.
But and I remember bumping into that same person. They're like, oh, I knew it.
You showed them what's what.
But I don't know. I think there was just something like just powerful about just being authentic and not.
Yeah, it's the best, really.
Yeah, and like, because I remember like I was still playing music and like trying to make it before the pandemic, and then like suddenly like everything shut, and I was just like, all right, well, you know what, like I got a decent job in journalism, like I'm never not gonna make music, so I was just like, yeah, I'll just I'll just make music because I love it, and I'll just make music that's like true to me, and like you know.
And now
And I was just like, yeah, no one's gonna hear it. So it's like whatever. Like I'm just gonna make the stuff I want to make.
Now you're traveling, collabing with Ray Zaragoza.
Yeah.
You can have a new EP out.
Yeah, that was
a lot of things.
That was wild because I remember Ray. So I knew of Ray before, right? Like
so you did.
I saw like when she went viral at Standing Rock, and like so I kind of just kept following.
What was your favorite? What was the first song you ever heard of hers?
It was the song that she did for the Standing Rock. It was like the protest song where she kind of like she was singing like all the facts of like the pipeline that they were protesting. And so like I just remember we put the record out, and then like Ray messaged me like 2 weeks later or something and DM'd me and was just like, not sure if you ever heard of me, just I've been listening to your record. If you ever want to work together, like we'd be honored to like sit down and write with you. And like I didn't even respond to her right away. I called my manager and I was just like, remember when we talked a year ago and you're just like, if you could write with any Indig singer-songwriter, like who would it be? And I was like, probably like Ray Zaragoza would be a sweet collab.
You said that.
I said that.
That's cool.
Almost a year to the day that Ray DM'd me. And like I like screenshot it and I sent it to my manager and I was like, you remember? And she's like, oh. And so it was kind of crazy, like the years just kind of been like that. But so yeah, like I ended up just as soon as I got off the call with my manager, I texted Ray. I was like, yeah, I would love to. Like when you're free.
That's super sweet.
Yeah. So we ended up like hopping on a Zoom like really soon after and just writing the song that we put out like just like recently. So
yeah, congratulations on that too. I played it a couple times. I know our morning show played it a couple times. So
yeah, it's gotten a lot of love lately, and it's like because we had like that big billboard in downtown Toronto. Like,
you did? I didn't see that.
It was like this massive, like right in downtown, the equivalent of what would be like your New York Times Square.
Yes,
like we have like the Toronto version of it. So we had like that big.
That's
like,
awesome.
Me and Ray just kind of like
action pose.
It was cool too because like we kind of flew Ray up and tried to get like some photo shoot stuff done and like called people and like our friends like, can you like suit us up and stuff and like
that's awesome.
So yeah, like we just looked really cool too and like we just kind of looked like guardians of the Toronto for a second there and like it was really cool just to think of like that was probably a year ago now that like we reached out, wrote the song. I think I was like coming to the Kansas City Folk Alliance in like February, and I flew over to LA after, and we recorded the track. I flew back, and then like we had like the demo, and then like the whole team was like, "This is amazing! Like we gotta like cut this song." And then like, so I flew back to LA, and we recorded it, and yeah, like it's kind of wild how just like it takes so long to put stuff out, but I guess like that's our teams figuring it out. Like for I feel like for me and like several artists, it's just like we just record it and put it out. But I guess there's a whole thing behind it. But it was crazy to think that like just a DM and then suddenly like there's like a billboard and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's only gonna go up and up from here, and you're about to play it here with Ray in a little bit. I do have like one final question. Like what now? You just released your EP Here and Now. You have that new song with Ray Zaragoza. What do you see in the future, or at least in the short future, for 2024?
Yeah, things are starting to book up now. Like I'm going on tour with Alison Russell in
that's amazing.
In like 2 weeks,
dude.
She just won a Grammy. So I'm really excited to kind of just be around that kind of level of artistry and energy, just to kind of soak it in, and I feel like that'll be kind of healing in many ways. And got a bunch of like kind of summer festivals in Canada. I'm gonna be releasing new music. Gonna be releasing a new album this year too. So
there we go.
But yeah, so just kind of trying to get into different places as well. Like got a few shows in the U.S. that we're still working out, but definitely going back to the U.K. for the Great Escape Festival, which is kind of like, I think it's like the South by Southwest of
Canada,
of England.
Oh, England.
So,
okay.
So gonna go do that. Coming back, playing some festivals, and then going back to like Estonia for kind of a similar kind of music conference, and yeah, it's wild. It's wild. No one told me about music conferences. Like I felt like I was just like setting up shows and just hoping people like walk through the door. But like these music conferences, you get to kind of play for like rooms full of these people
who are there specifically just to discover new music.
Exactly. Like they're there. They're like the promoters. They're the agents. They're the music industry, and they're going to like, you know, find people to play their festivals and stuff. So,
well, I hope you play all the festivals, man.
Yeah, me too.
You deserve it. It's gonna be a busy year then, but you're gonna be tired. But
oh yeah, and honestly, like it's crazy because like there's definitely been times in like the last year where it's been like just crisscrossing, but like, and I do get tired, but like,
yeah,
you know, two things. One, like, you just kind of flip the perspective of just kind of being like, you know, I don't need to do anything. Like, I get to do this. Like, this is something I've like dreamed of like all my life. So it's like to be able to do it. Like, even when you get tired sometimes, like, wait a second, like have some gratitude because you're getting to do what you want to do. And B, oh yeah, like I used to work up north, and like so like, you know, I used to like work in like bush tents and stuff, and like have to like walk through swamps and like snowshoe for like kilometers and kilometers. So it's like
some near-death experiences.
And so like to go from like that, like I have to remind myself and like remember like fucking trudging through like,
oh my goodness,
and like almost drowning and like getting like chased by bears and stuff. And now I stay in hotels, you know. It's like, it's not bad.
Yeah.
It's like
the only thing is you have to walk from one gate to the other. Get a layover sometime here and there.
Yeah,
Stay
exactly.
at the airport every so often.
That's the one thing. Airports could be better. There's like a lot of anti-human infrastructure in there, but yeah, people in airports are not at their best. They're just like, everyone's so exhausted and.
It's that energy for the airport. Well, Aysanabee, thank you so much for making it out on this rainy day. You're going to play a couple songs in there. I'm excited for it. For all of you, we have a Ray Zaragoza cameo for that new song that they released, Come Out. So stick around. He's going to go in there, play you a couple songs, and you should definitely check out his new album, Watan?
Yeah.
Watan and Here and Now. Yeah. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and check out Aysanabee.
Yeah, thank you. Check it out.
Thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.